Focus on Headline. All right, let's take a look at what major issues are making the headlines today on Focus on Headline. For this, joining us in the studio, we have our Wednesday reporters in Handan and Yoonhae-jung. Guys, welcome back.
Good evening.
Good evening to you guys. Well, for a change, we're going to start off with some positive news, I guess. I guess it's good news if you're someone like me. All South Koreans, or anyone here in South Korea, have become a year or two younger as the new law stipulating the use of international standard age took effect starting today. We've talked about this I guess in one of our segments last year. We've talked about it again a few months ago as well. Now the changes are set in place. Tan, you're going to start us off. Walk us through some of the major changes that we should take note of.
It's a great day, isn't it, everyone? I woke up 2 years younger today because in order to get the international age, you subtract the year of your birth from the current year, which is 2023, and that cuts off 1 year off your Korean age. And if your birthday did not pass, it cuts off another year from the Korean age. So for me, it was -2 years, and I am feeling great. So the new legislation, which is a revision to the Basic Administrative Act and the Civil Acts that was passed by the National Assembly last December, came into effect as of today, which saw all judicial and administrative areas adopt the international age system. Now, this ended years of debate about the problems caused by the traditional age system or the Korean age system, which became increasingly unpopular. Not to mention that it makes all Koreans older. It also has been stirring a lot of confusion when used along with the globally recognized age system, causing administrative inefficiency across all areas. For our listeners who may still be wondering how the Korean age system works, all Koreans become 1 year old at birth, and a year is added every January 1st. Under the international age system used in most parts of the world, a baby is 0 year old at birth and a year is added every birthday. But there's still a little bit of confusion because the traditional Korean age system will be kept in some areas, and this includes when entering elementary school, buying alcohol or tobacco, and when serving in the military. First off, elementary school. Children in Korea typically enter elementary schools in March of the year after they turn 6 in international age, regardless of which month their birthday falls. And this will continue. This is to make sure students born in the same year enter school in the same year. And similar to this, laws on age-restricted products like alcohol or tobacco will also be based on the year someone is born, regardless of month. This means 2 people born in January and December will be judged to be the same age. And currently people are allowed to buy alcohol starting in the year they turn 19 in international age in Korea. Again, this is to avoid confusion when using the international age system that adds age every birthday. The same method will continue to be used for South Korea's mandatory military service, meaning people are eligible based on the year they were born rather than their specific age or birth date. The government explained that these areas will be exceptional as it is easier to manage such issues on a yearly basis. Banks, credit card companies, and national pension-related services already have been using the international age system, and so not much will be different. But cases vary among insurance companies, so people are advised to check their contract again to see if there's any change following the enforcement of the new age system. And Hae-jung will have more on this.
I have to say, the only people who were very upset with the change in the age were kids like my son, who I had to convince that he is no longer 5 years old, but 4 years old. And all this morning, because we started calling him now, we tell him he's a big boy now, but when he was 4, we still called him a baby.
A baby.
And he said, I don't want to be a baby. I'm not 4 years old. So, kids like that, it's going to be really hard. He's finally got the whole age thing correctly. But for all of us, I have lost 2 years out of my age, which is lovely here. But again, as Korea is adopting this whole global standard age system, I'm sure there's going to be some changes in different sectors about what age to apply when doing business. And again, I mean, it's still very much confusing for some of the consumers out there. So, Haejung, are there any measures in place to help us adjust to these new changes?
Well, as Korea is adopting the global standard age system, the Financial Supervisory Service, or FSS, has begun operating a financial inconvenience counseling center. Now, the center, which is operated under the Financial Supervisory Service call center, will provide guidance on financial complaints regarding the new age system and connect consumers and customers to the relevant departments of the FSS or financial companies. However, as Taeun just gave us a preview, as the FSS has found out that the age-related regulations in financial laws already follow the international age system, so the impact on financial sector's businesses and financial consumers is expected to be minimal. For instance, the guidelines for the protection of elderly financial consumers in the banking sector, which defines elderly consumers as those aged 65 or older, is already based on the global standard age system. And major commercial banks as well as online banks are already using the international age system when signing up their customers for financial products, so they don't expect any major changes in the future as well. The payment card industry also issues not only credit cards but also debit cards that minors can sign up for based on international age, so they do not need to make any adjustments as well. But however, in the case of the insurance industry, the so-called insurance age is applied, which is quite different from the international age, so consumers need to be careful when signing up for insurance. So in the case of insurance age, if 6 months have passed since your birthday, you need to add 1 year from your international age, but if less than 6 months have passed since your most recent birthday, your international age becomes your insurance age. Now, the insurance age is used in life insurance and long-term insurance to calculate premiums, subscription age, and determine the maturity date. But if the law or individual policy specifies the age separately depending on specific terms, the insurance age does not apply, so it is important to check thoroughly before getting insurance. So in the medium to long term, the FSS will consider a plan to unify the insurance age to the global standard age system if necessary.
All right. I think some of us has to use the Financial Inconvenience Counseling Center because it does get very, very confusing with all of this. But again, since Korea, again, relatively very new with this age system, which, by the way, has been used by the rest of the world, basically, it'll take time here. So the main Yang says you just have to eat 2 bowls of tteokguk in order for it. Now, it doesn't work that way. In that case, I'm much younger than I really am because I'm not a big fan of that. But nevertheless, we'll see how this certainly does impact the society here in Korea. We're going to talk about other issues, heavy downpours battering these southern regions from yesterday, wreaking havoc across many areas. Now, 1 person went missing in the South Jeolla province, while roads, houses were inundated. Various facilities were damaged as well. Don, it is the start of the monsoon season. Let's get the details of this.
Sure. The damage was mostly centered on Gwangju and South Jeolla province, where over 360 millimeters of rainfall pounded residential areas, farms, and key infrastructures in the past 4 days. This marked the largest amount of rainfall in 5 years for Gwangju and 3 years in Gwangyang. Southern coastal city of Yeosu in South Jeolla province also saw the 3rd heaviest rainfall in history, seeing over 40 millimeters of heavy downpours per hour. In Hampyeong, South Jeolla province, where over 70 millimeters per hour of rain swept the region on Tuesday night, a facility inspector in her 60s went missing after she went to check a floodgate on a river. Some 90 rescuers from the fire department are continuing their search. There have been 85 damage reports so far in South Jeolla province, most of which came from Naju, Damyang, Hampyeong, and Hwasun. Water levels rose rapidly at streams, causing floods and inundating houses and farms and cutting electricity in Hwasun and Damyang. An embankment collapsed and dozens of farms were submerged in Koksang. Other cities and towns, including Yeosu, Gohung, and Gwangyang, Gwangyang saw dozens of inundation and damage reports. Over 180 reports of various damage were filed in Gwangju alone overnight. Looking into further details, a city bus was submerged and an apartment parking lot and low-lying roads were inundated, while the downpours knocked down trees, forcing nearby residents to evacuate from possible landslides. An embankment was partially washed away in rain, forcing over 100 residents to evacuate to a nearby school auditorium. South Cholla Province estimates nearly 280 hectares of farmland have been flooded. Traffic was blocked off from 15 roads, 2 underpasses, 9 riverside parking lots, and 35 bridges, while 10 national parks and some 300 hiking trails were off limits, according to the Central Disaster Agency. All heavy rain alerts have been lifted, but forecasters say more rain is expected to hit the southern regions from tonight, and local residents are advised to stay away from low-lying areas and rivers or streams. While more rain are in the forecast nationwide tomorrow, torrential rain is expected to once again center around the southern regions and Jeju Island.
You know, we talked about the concerns over these very extreme weather patterns because up until about last year, it was like the South Cholla, the Cholla province areas where they were seeing severe drought. All the rain was sort of in the central region and in the Gyeongsang regions, and it was the Cholla region where they were seeing extreme drought. And so, again, extreme differences right now in the weather. Now, what we're seeing right now is in the central region, not as much rain as some of the southern regions, and now the Cholla region seeing too much rain is what's happening right now. And as we talked about yesterday, whether it be drought or extreme, heavy downpours like this, it is also going to impact the prices of the agriculture because a lot of the areas that we just talked about, a lot of farmland there. Of course, we do have more rain in the forecast there, and it is expected that we have heavy monsoon rain expected nationwide towards the end of the week. And throughout this year, what they're saying is not only is it going to be a very, very hot summer, they're also expecting a whole lot of precipitation according to a number of forecasts here. So, Haejang, let's get more on the weather trends for the rest of the year.
Sure. Now, according to the Korea Meteorological Administration, they describe rain with a precipitation of 30 millimeters per hour or more as very strong rain. Now, to put this into perspective, at 30 to 40 millimeters per hour, it makes it difficult for drivers to see the road ahead, even with their windshield wipers on. By the morning of the 27th, more than 100 millimeters of rain had fell across the country, including up to 372 millimeters on Jeju's Hallasan Mountain, which was the heaviest rain. But fortunately, no major damage has occurred so far. But as the rainy season isn't over yet, and it's expected to start raining again across the country starting the 29th, which is tomorrow, the accumulation of small damages can lead to big ones. What we especially need to be careful of is torrential downpours, which is when a lot of rain falls in a short period of time. Until the 27th, Korea has been affected not only by the stationary front, but also by the low atmospheric pressure passing over the stationary front. Now, after the low atmospheric pressure passes, relatively cold and dry air is pulled in from the north and collides with the hot, humid southerly winds, creating a narrow band of rain clouds, which forms a stationary front. Now, this collision of air with different properties makes the atmosphere very unstable, and rain clouds easily develop in such conditions. As such, this will bring strong and heavy rain in the entire country. In the past, rainfall was mostly concentrated in the monsoon season in Korea, but in recent summers, there has been more rain after the end of the monsoon in August. Now, this summer, the nation is expected to see even more precipitation after the monsoon season ends due to the effects of the El Niño weather pattern. The Korea Meteorological Administration said many areas may experience heavy downpours as late as the fall and urged people in areas that are especially prone to flooding to continue to remain alert.
Again, for any of our listeners in Korea that are tuning in, and I'm sure we have also many listeners over in the beautiful island of Jeju, a lot of these southern regions are being slammed by these heavy rains. So please please practice caution and continue to tune in for these weather forecasts. I'm sure our Arirang radio announcers will continue to keep a close tab on these weather conditions there. Let's move on here. The Minimum Wage Commission held a plenary session on Tuesday to fix next year's minimum wage, but once again, talks falling through as the labor sector walked out in protest against what they call the government's oppression on workers. Tan, give us the latest developments on this.
Right. Members of the commission gathered for the 8th plenary session, but went nowhere near reaching an agreement on setting next year's minimum wage. The labor circle decided not to join the negotiations in protest over what it called the government's oppression of laborers. They argued that the Yoon Suk-yeol government is morphing the commission into one which is favorable to the government and the business circle. The walkout followed a violent suppression of Kim Jun-young, General Secretary of the Federation of Korean Metal Workers Trade Unions. Kim was arrested earlier this month on charges of interfering with a government crackdown. The workers' side suggested another member to fill Kim's absence at the commission, but the Labor Ministry did not accept a new panel member. Workers argue that the ministry is not accepting a new member from the labor sector with no acceptable reasons. The commission is due to report to the Labor Ministry on next year's proposed minimum wage by tomorrow, but given the current rift between the two sides, it's almost certain they won't be able to meet the deadline. It's no surprise, though, because the deadline was met only 9 times since the minimum wage system was first introduced in 1988. Workers have demanded the minimum wage to be raised to 12,210 won per hour in their initial proposal, which is up nearly 27% from this year. That's around 2.5 million won a month, given 209 monthly working hours. They urged for a raise, citing the need to boost consumption, resolve widening income inequality amid falling real wages of workers. The business community, on the other hand, are requesting to freeze the wage at the current 9,621, citing businesses' lack of ability to pay higher wages. They also say that higher wages did not lead to an increase in productivity and pointed out there was no clear improvement in income distribution either. The next plenary session is set for tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where it's hard to take any sides with this. It's true that with the current minimum wage, it's really hard to afford anything nowadays, whether it be housing or just, getting groceries or anything like that. Inflation has impacted all of us. But on the flip side, if you do really add increase the minimum wage to, 12,210 won per hour, the businesses and the employers are going to be impacted by this. And in order to meet the minimum wage, they're going to start increasing prices on everything, and then now prices go up and everything. It's a whole circle once again. And so it's the big point here is trying to meet in the middle. Unfortunately, though, it seems like there's just no discussion in place right now. In the meantime, we have some economic figures here. Korea's Consumer Sentiment Index, this hit the highest in 13 months thanks to recovering the post-pandemic activities and easing of inflation. Haejung, you have the numbers for us.
Right. According to the central bank data released today, South Korea's consumer sentiment hit the highest point in 13 months in June as post-pandemic activities gathered pace and inflation eased. The composite consumer Sentiment Index, or CCSI, stood at 100.7 in June, up from 98 the previous month, marking the 4th consecutive month of rise, according to the survey from the Bank of Korea. Also, the June reading is the highest since 102.9 in May last year. And a reading above 100 means optimists outnumber pessimists. Now, the CCSI is calculated using 6 of the 15 indices that make up the Consumer Survey Index, which include current living conditions and expectations for household and consumer expenditure. And compared to last month, all of the 6 indices recorded an increase in June. The central bank said that hopes for an easing of economic slowdown, a mild recovery in private spending in the post-pandemic era, and eased inflation helped boost consumer sentiment. Meanwhile, the country's inflation expectations recorded 3.5%, which is the same as last month. The figures are closely watched as their upward move could cause businesses to raise prices and people to ask for pay raises, thereby resulting in more upward pressure on inflation going forward. Now, South Korea's inflation has been on a downward trend with some ups and downs after reaching a peak of 6.3% in July last year. But the latest figure is still above the central bank's medium-term target of 2%. And consumer prices, a key gauge of inflation, rose 3.3% in May from a year earlier, slowing from a 3.7% on-year rise in April. The latest reading marked the lowest level since 3.2% in October 2021. Last month, the BOK kept its benchmark rate unchanged at 3.5%, the third straight month of a rate freeze, as it trimmed this year's growth estimate in the face of an extended slowdown in exports amid easing inflationary pressure.
That's right, but despite all this, we know that the U.S. Fed will raise rates maybe 2 more times the rest of the way, and there's a big question of whether or not the South Korean Central Bank will be able to keep seeing a widening in the interest gap between the two central banks. So again, another figure that we'll continue to keep a close tab here. We're going to move on here. South Korea has slapped sanctions on a Russian individual of Korean descent involved in Pyongyang's illegal weapons financing activities. Don, you have more on this.
Right. The government imposed unilateral sanctions on a Russian individual of Korean descent named Choi Chon Gon today for his involvement in the illegal financing of Pyongyang's weapons of mass destruction programs. This marks the first time the government blacklisted an individual of South Korean descent for sanctions. Choi was previously a South Korean national, obtained Russian nationality afterwards, and ever since have been working for the North Korean regime, violating multiple UN Security Council resolutions. He founded a North Korea front company named Hanne-Ullan in Mongolia for the purpose of evading international sanctions while securing funding for Pyongyang's weapons programs. According to Seoul's foreign ministry, Choi was among the total of 4 entities and individuals newly added to Seoul's sanctions list against Pyongyang's nuclear and missile development programs. He's also accused of having supported Pyongyang's illegal financing by establishing Epsilon, a Russia-based trading firm, through a joint investment partnership with Samyang, head of the North's Foreign Trade Bank branch in Vladivostok. Samyang, Epsilon, and Hanne-Ullan were all added to South Korea's independent sanctions list, which marked the world's first. Choi is known to have departed for Russia while being investigated in South Korea for an alleged financial crime and appears to have obtained Russian citizenship afterward. He's believed to be operating other businesses in Vladivostok and maintains close ties with the Korean community there. The foreign ministry said the unilateral sanctions on Choi and the others will help raise awareness both at home and abroad to prevent activities that violate sanctions. The announcement marks Seoul's 9th unilateral sanctions against the North since the launch of the Yoon administration in May last year. A total of 45 individuals and 47 agencies have been added to the sanctions list so far.
Well, speaking of North Korea, but potentially maybe good news, because the International Olympic Committee is now planning to invite North Korea to the 2024 Paris Olympics. Believe it or not, we already have the Olympics coming up next year. We had North Korea, of course, failing to take part, and they were suspended for other IOC events. Now it seems like they're going to be invited to the next Summer Games here. Haejung, you have more on this.
Right. According to the Voice of America on Wednesday, the IOC said that the National Olympic Committee, or NOC, of North Korea will be invited just like all other eligible NOCs. Now, an NOC is the organization that represents a country at the Olympics and governs domestic Olympic-related matters such such as the Korea Sport and Olympic Committee in South Korea. But according to the Voice of America, there was no response to the question asking if the North had contacted the IOC or the organizing committee for the 2024 Olympics. North Korea's foreign ministry hinted at the country's participation in the international sporting event on the International Olympic Day, which was last Friday, releasing a statement that said its athletes are training hard for the glory of their country in international events, including the Olympics. And North Korea celebrated the Olympic Day, June 23rd, with a fun run event with athletes who have competed in past Olympics or World Championships who ran through the streets of Pyongyang. Now, in the past, North Korea was suspended from competing in the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics after it boycotted the 2020 Tokyo Games due to concerns over COVID-19. But the suspension was automatically lifted when the deadline expired at the end of last year. And the North will be participating in the upcoming Asian Games in Hangzhou, China.
Again, I mean, there was... They were suspended, right? And so that's the reason why they weren't able to compete in the 2022 Beijing Winter Games, which there was a lot of controversies in regards to this because they weren't saying that they weren't going to go to the Tokyo Games because they're not a big fan of Japan or anything like that. It wasn't a political statement. As you guys know, during the COVID-19 pandemic, North Korea was probably one of those countries that really closed down their border. I mean, it's already hard to go into North Korea anyways. They really closed it down to the point where it even impacted all the people inside North Korea. There was starvation going on. And so you would have thought that maybe the IOC would say, well, since it is an unprecedented situation with the COVID-19 pandemic, that if a country decides that they're not going to take part in the Olympic Games, maybe you should kind of say, all right, I guess, I mean, we'll give you a free pass on this. But that wasn't the case. And so they were suspended. But I guess now with all this, they'll be able to take part in the Asian Games in 2024, the Paris Olympic Games. And for all of our listeners out there who might go, well, it's not like North Korea is going to win anything. Actually, they're a powerhouse when it comes to stuff like weightlifting. And stuff like this. And what is it? Gymnastics is another category that they're also very much known for. So we'll see. And of course, anytime you have things like this, we're hoping for any kind of sports diplomacy that may trigger any kind of dialogue between the two Koreas. Let's move on here and continue to talk about the major story that happened this past weekend, the armed rebellion by the Wagner Group in Russia. That really, let's face it, really did catch the world by surprise. We have the Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko, who have confirmed that Yevgeny Prigozhin, who is the head of the mercenary Wagner Group, he arrived in Belarus. I believe there was also other sources that said that his private plane had arrived in Minsk as well. Tan, fill us in on the latest.
The Belarusian leader confirmed that Prigozhin is now in Belarus after a short-lived armed mutiny in Russia. Prigozhin's exile in Belarus had been announced by the Kremlin earlier as part of the deal that ended the rebellion. Lukashenko on Tuesday said Prigozhin has moved to Belarus and he and some of his troops would be welcome to stay in the country for some time at their own expense. Lukashenko also said that the rebellion was the result of a breakdown in relations between Wagner and the Russian army. He told reporters that, quote unquote, the situation got away from us. Then we thought it would be resolved, but it hasn't been resolved, and that there are no heroes in this story. The Belarusian president has earlier said that Belarus is not building any camps for Russia's Wagner Group, but will accommodate them if they want. Under the deal brokered by Lukashenko late on Saturday that ended the mutiny by the Wagner fighters, they were allowed either to join Russia's regular armed forces, move with their leader Prigozhin into exile in Belarus, or simply return to their families. Lukashenko also added that there were no plans to open any Wagner recruitment centers in Belarus. The aborted rebellion by the Wagner Group has been the biggest challenge faced by Putin since taking office more than 2 decades ago. Lukashenko successfully mediated between President Putin and Prigozhin, and Putin thanked his Lukashenko's contribution to resolving what he called a difficult situation during his TV address. South Korea's presidential office, meanwhile, is closely observing the developments related to the Wagner Group's revolt against Russia's military, carefully analyzing possible impact on South Korea's national interests. A senior presidential official told Yonhap News Agency that the Wagner incident should not be viewed as it's completely over, and that the mutiny should not be dismissed as just one of the minor events that emerged during the course of the Russia-Ukraine war. The top office reportedly believes it's an event that impacts Korea's national interests, and the government is reportedly looking into how it could affect the regional security surrounding the Korean peninsula. It's also reportedly tracking possible arms trade between Russia and North Korea involving the Wagner Group.
There's so many interesting things that could happen now. The big question now is, remember, it was the Wagner Group that was doing the vast majority of the fighting for Russia in Ukraine.
Right.
So if they're in exile right now, and you have Prigozhin in Belarus, and I believe a number of the mercenary fighters have decided to go home, I think was what it was, or they decided to join the Russian Ministry of Defense was one of the options that were put in place. Whether or not Wagner fighters are going to be returning to Ukraine to fight, because it doesn't seem like right now Prigozhin is active in leading these mercenary, but there is some article, I'm looking at a Guardian piece saying that the Wagner fighters are said to be returned to Ukraine bases as recruitment continues. So still, there is a big question as whether or not Wagner is going to get involved with the Ukraine war, number one. And now that they're also sort of stationed, quote unquote stationed, although Belarus said that they're not going to be giving any kind of bases or anything like that in Belarus, they are still located in Belarus. You have a number of countries in those the Baltic Sea area, like for example Estonia. You have Lithuania, you have Latvia,
right.
That's going to be very concerned about their presence, whether or not they're going to be using Belarus as a buffer zone, or maybe, Poland, I know, is watching very closely, and obviously Ukraine is, even though they consider this as a favorable situation that they're in exile and not potentially in the favor of Putin, still they're very much close to
very good point.
Yeah, they're very close to the Ukraine border, so they can't feel very easy with this. So it's going to turn out very, very interesting. We'll see how this also impacts the counteroffensive from Ukraine as well. In the meantime, let's talk about Japan's release of wastewater from the crippled Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. It is very much imminent. The country is beginning its final stage of preparations. The IAEA is also expected to release its final report on the safety of the wastewater, which is deemed a critical stage in getting international consent. Hejin, let's get the latest on this.
Sure. Despite concerns from several nations, Japanese regulators have begun final inspections on a newly completed system for the controversial release of the treated radioactive water from the crippled Fukushima nuclear plant into the Pacific Ocean. On Tuesday, the Tokyo Electric Power Company completed a test operation of the roughly 1 kilometer long underwater tunnel through which the treated wastewater will flow for the next 30 years. And starting Wednesday, the country's Nuclear Regulation Authority will start a 3-day overall inspection of the plant, after which a certificate of examination will be issued, which is the final green light for the water release. But Japan does still need to wait for a final report from the IAEA on the safety of the wastewater, which is expected early next week. But no challenges are expected for Japan, as the IAEA Director General Rafael Mariano Grossi already stated in April of 2021 that Japan's chosen method is both technically feasible and in line with international practice. The advanced liquid processing system, which is used to treat the water, removes most of the radioactive substances in the water except extract tritium. The final dilution process at the plant will lower tritium levels to below 1/40th of the government standards before the water is released into the ocean. And TEPCO will measure the concentration of radioactive material before and after discharge, and if it is detected above the safety threshold, TEPCO will urgently stop the discharge. However, one last hurdle standing in the way of the Japanese government's call to begin the release is local fishing communities that have been staging fierce protests, not only over concerns about safety, but also damage to reputation. Now, back in 2015, the Japanese government and TEPCO promised fishermen in the Fukushima region that no discharge of contaminated water will be made without the consent of the relevant parties. The exact timing of the release of the contaminated water is not yet clear, and Prime Minister Kishida is expected to make the decision based on his efforts to convince fishermen near the plant who oppose the release, as well as the reaction of neighboring countries.
Yeah, it seems like, although, there is heavy opposition from the fishing community in Fukushima, I think the consensus right now is that the government is going to give them some kind of compensation fund or something, but whether or not that's enough to I guess make them happy is the big thing, because they've been saying for the past 10 years they've been trying to improve their image of the Fukushima seafood, but now with this, their image might be tainted once again and again, despite the fact that the current Yoon administration has been more favorable towards Japan and its release of the wastewater. They've still banned importing the Fukushima seafood, so there are still some concerns on that front.
I've been talking to experts about this, and some experts say Japan maintains a very conservative level of tritium that will be discharged into the ocean. So it's not a major point of concern, while other experts mention that tritium is not the main focus here.
Not, yeah.
TEPCO is yet to, clearly prove that all the other harmful radionuclides will actually be removed before the discharge, and they say they still need more proof on that. But I think what we do know for sure is that South Korea and the neighboring countries, including all the Pacific Islands, have nothing to gain from this.
No, absolutely not. And that's what you made a very good point with transparency, because initially tritium was the one thing that we were concerned about, but we're now finding out that tritium is not the big problem. And Japan, if Japan was more transparent from the very start, they weren't very transparent in the very beginning, which is why even though there was leaks that were reported, they never disclosed it to some of the other countries out there. That's why there's a whole lot of skepticism. So once it's inevitable, they're going to release the wastewater, that's for sure, but they have to start doing more testing after the release of it and see how the marine life is impacted by this, how the seafood is, the fish is impacted by this, and of course share the information as transparent as possible, I think, is the big thing here. So we'll see, or whether or not it's the last of any raw fish I'm going to have for the rest of my life here. But nevertheless, guys, thank you very much for your reports today. Have a safe one. We'll see you guys again.
Thank you.
You can listen to Korea Now with me, SJ Lee, by downloading the Arirang Radio application, or tune in online by visiting www.arirangradio.com. So make sure you tune in Mondays through Fridays, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Korea time.